Hey, my name's Rachel. Welcome back to another video. In this video, I will be going over my July wrap-up. It is only July 29th, however, there are still 2 days left in the month, and I will probably squeeze in 2 more volumes of manga before the end of the month, so I'll just add them into next month's wrap-up because I do not have time to film this video later this week. I need to do it now. So the last 2 days of July are going to be honorary August days for me next month. I feel like overall I had a great reading month this month in terms of quality. I did have a few books that were kind of like meh, but I didn't have anything that I hated, and there was nothing I read that kind of put me in a slump or really made me like not want to read. So that's really good. I've been having a lot better of a reading year in the second half of this year so far, so let's hope that continues in August. Let's talk about some bookish stats. So in July, I read 1 5-star book, 5 4-star books, 1 3-star book, and 1 2-star book. I also read a variety of book formats. I read 4 manga, 4 novels, and 1 novella. And as far as the format that I read them in, I read 2 physical books, 3 audiobooks, and 4 ebooks. The first book that I read in July was called The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw. I read another book by this author and I really liked it, and I wasn't a huge fan of this one. I gave it like a 2.5 star. I think that it was just kind of fine. It did get a little bit too abstract for me because of how short it was. I think that it did need to be just slightly more defined in its plot and its world building because we didn't get a lot of time with the characters, so we didn't really get to read between the lines, so to speak. And this one was a dark, like mermaid, like kind of Little Mermaid retelling, but it almost had like a vampiric kind of nature to it, and it did feel like very gothic in nature. And I think that if I were to reread it, I would probably read it physically because this is one that I listened to on audio, and the audiobook narrator's voice was like fine, but it did kind of make me zone out just a little bit in some places. So I think that if I were to ever reread it, I would read it physically. But I didn't hate it. It was just like, okay, you know, you ever read a book like that where like you just kind of like, it's fine, like nothing special, but I don't hate it. That's how I felt for this one, but I still am interested to read more from this author. Next, I'm just going to talk about all 4 of these volumes of manga together. I read volumes 3, 4, 5, and 6 of Tokyo Ghoul, and for those of you who don't know, this manga follows a young boy named Ken Kaneki, and he lives in a world where ghouls live alongside humans secretly, and like people kind of know about them, but they live as humans, so it's hard to distinguish who's who. And one day Ken goes on a date with a girl who turns out to be a ghoul. They end up in this freak accident and they both go to the hospital, and there's a doctor there who transplants a liver from the dead girl into Kaneki's body, and he turns into a half ghoul, half human hybrid. And this series is about him trying to live with that and figuring out what the fuck he's supposed to do now that he's half a ghoul. And I really like this series because it grapples so much with what's right and what's wrong, but I also kind of just love, like, there's some gore to it. You know, they're ghouls, they eat humans, that's their food source, so it's a little bit gory, a little bit disgusting. There's a lot of action scenes. I think the main character Kaneki is like really nuanced because he is struggling so much between wanting to stay true to his human nature, but he needs to lean into his ghoulish nature if he's going to survive. Astro, every time I film, you have to come rub on the tripod. Can you get out of here? I love you, go away. So for these, I gave them all 4 stars, except I think volume 6 I gave like a 3.75. I didn't like it as much as the first time I read it because there was a very like big chunk in the middle that was focused on the ghoul investigators who are like trying to kill the ghouls, and let's just be honest, they're not as fun to read about as it is to read about the ghouls themselves. The next book I read in July was The Queens of Venice by Tessa Gratton. I read this for my reading the oldest book on my TBR video, which I will link in the card and down in the description below. This book is about 3 sisters trying to vie for the crown after their father inevitably succumbs to his madness, and there's rumors that he murdered his wife. There's rumors that he's just losing his shit and he's going crazy. There's like all these conspiracy theories surrounding why he's going mad. And these 3 sisters are trying to figure out how to take power for themselves after his fall. It is very much political, family drama, and not much else. I don't think there's a singular action scene in here. It was beautifully written, don't get me wrong. I think the writing was technically like well written, good writing, beautiful. However, I found the characters very lackluster. I found the plot extremely like one note and boring. So I gave this one also a 2-star. My neighbors just pulled it in their driveway and absolutely saw me filming. So that's really awkward and fun for me. Fuck. The next book I read in July was The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer, and this is a new favorite book of mine. I fell in love with this book within 2 chapters of picking it up. I actually had an e-arc of this one, so I started reading it at the very beginning of the month because I knew that this was coming out in the middle of July, and so I got to it earlier in the month, and oh my god, I flew through this. I think I read it in like 2 days flat, which is impossible for me to do lately because it's just me here with my kiddo. When I tell you, every single moment that I had to spare to pick up a book, I was grabbing my Kindle, I was speeding through the chapters, I would put Riley to bed, and I would just read for hours on end at night, and I haven't done that in so long. This book follows 3 main characters. They are Emily, Jeremy, and Rafe, and when Jeremy and Rafe are boys, they actually go missing in the woods, and they return 6 months later under mysterious circumstances, and nobody really knows what happens to them except the boys themselves. Only the catch is that only Jeremy remembers, and Rafe has no idea what happened to them while they were gone. Jump forward, I think it's 15 years later, we meet Emily, and she is looking for her sister who is missing. Apparently, when Emily was younger, she was adopted, and as she got older, her adopted mother died of cancer, and after her mother died of cancer, she did one of those DNA tests online, and she learned that she had a sister, but then she quickly found out that her sister was missing. She made it her mission to go and find her sister, so she enlisted the help of Jeremy, who was very well known for helping find missing girls. We follow these 3 characters on an adventure of self-discovery, a little bit of trauma, learning how to be brave, just complete mystery and whimsy, and I don't want to say anything else because I don't want to ruin any of the surprises that are in here for you if you decide to read this book, but I could not put this book down. I teared up like 3 times. I cried at the end. I thought it was so heartwarming and a little bit gut-wrenching and just so fun and easy to fly through. The characters were so lovable. I loved Emily and Jeremy and Rafe equally, and I feel like when you have a trio of characters, you know, there's always like one that you like just a little bit less than the others. No, not in The Lost Story. Meg Schaefer absolutely made all of these characters so relatable, so lovable. You can't help but to root for them, and oh, my heart. There's also a cute little rat sidekick in here. He's adorable. So if you like pet animals that like are involved in the story and don't get forgotten and stay with the group, this one's for you. And there's also magic and whimsy. There's like a portal fantasy aspect. This is absolutely amazing. New favorite, 5 stars, of course. Should I even have to say it? I think not. Also, check it out. My book is signed. And the map is signed by the map artist who is Meg Schaefer's husband. How adorable. The next book I read in July was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. I loved this book so much. I loved this more than the first one. Can you believe it? So I read the first one years and years and years and years ago, and I really liked it. And then I reread it about a year and a half ago so I could get to the sequel. And I read it and like it was still super solid. I did really enjoy it. I thought the characters were great and everything was fantastic. But something about just like the way that the story kind of ended, like after they leave the college, if you're familiar with the story, after they leave the college, you know, like it was fine, I guess. Like I think I gave it maybe a 4 stars because I thought it was solid and great, but it didn't have that little extra oomph for me. But this one, so in this book, we mostly follow Victor and Sydney again from book 1, and you know, there's shenanigans. I really don't want to spoil anything because if you haven't read book 1, this will kind of like, there will be spoilers for you if you haven't read book 1, so I don't want to say too much. But in this one, we follow Victor and Sydney again, and then there's a new character in here called Marcella, who I loved her. Absolute girl boss. Absolutely fantastic character. I thought she was like effervescent and badass, and I kind of just wanted to like be her sidekick, let her boss me around a little bit. And yeah, I thought this was really fun. I thought the pacing was amazing compared to the first one. I think the first one, that was probably my biggest problem, was it did feel like a little bit slow in places, but this one was just the whole way. Such good pacing, kept me on my toes, and I can't wait. And V.E. Schwab just announced that there's gonna be a third one. I was literally halfway through this when she made the post on Instagram that said Victor Vale is running out of time. Fucking gagged, let me tell you. This was really great. I think it gave it like a 4.5 stars. Fantastic. The last book I read in July was The Gods Below by Andrea Stewart. I got an arc of this on NetGalley, and I have been such a fan of Andrea Stewart since her series The Drowning Empire, which is right here behind me. I don't know if you can see it. Love them. Love Andrea. I think she has a really strong way with character building. I think her characters are always pretty nuanced and they have multifacets to them. They're not just one-dimensional. They're fun to read about, and you also can't help but root for them too. This one I thought was really crazy. Definitely like an intriguing premise. I don't want to spoil it. There is so much that goes on in this book, and I feel like the synopsis tells you a little bit too much, so I'm not going to tell you as much as the synopsis. Mostly we follow these two sisters, Hakara and Rasha, and we start out with them as little girls, and then there is kind of a jump forward in time, like right away, I think within like the first 5 chapters, and then we follow them as they're adults navigating this kind of dystopian, like a fantasy dystopian land where like the land is kind of harsh, things aren't growing as much as they should, they have to rely on magic gems to do it, but it's dangerous because the gems are also sought after by this god, and he uses the gems to enact restoration, which the easiest way I can think to describe what's happening is that wall of like purple smoky fire in Raya and the Last Dragon that kind of like goes over people and turns them to stone. Like imagine that, but instead of people being turned to stone, they get altered into these like beastly creatures, and the land that also gets touched by this wall turns very green and fertile and lush. So yeah. There's that imagery for you. I feel like I'm talking too much. But in this one, we follow Rasha and her sister Hakara, and they got separated, and we follow them through their journeys on separate sides of this crazy war that's been going on for centuries. And at the beginning of each chapter, you get a tiny snippet of what the gods were going through like 500 years ago. And it's just so cool how the past lines up with things that are starting to happen in the present that we are following with the two main characters. And I think there's just a lot of spunk, and the magic system is really fun. The way that the magic system works really makes fight scenes like kind of engaging because you have to pay attention to who's doing what. Everybody has a certain role, and I think it's great. I don't want to tell you too much. If you're going to read it and you read the synopsis, only read like the top half of the synopsis because I think it does spoil you just a tiny bit for some of the surprise of the plot as you read farther down in the summary. But I gave this a 4 stars. I think it was amazing. A good start to a trilogy. It really has me on edge to see what happens next. And the way that this book ended, like the last chapter, I read the last chapter 4 times. I kept flipping back, like, what did I just read? Am I actually reading what I think I'm reading? No, my eyes are deceiving me. This can't be happening right now. What is going on? And then I would just read it again and have all the same thoughts. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? So if you liked Andrea Stewart's other series, I think you'll love this one too. It does have that same feeling of it where there's like a kernel of hope hidden underneath of a bunch of despair. And this one is a little bit darker, I would say. There's a lot more descriptions of like kind of maybe like body gore-ish. A little bit, just a little bit. It's not really like gore, I would say, but it's more like maybe body horror because there's these disfigured like gods and creatures, and it's definitely a little bit darker in tone. Not super dark, mind you. Not super dark, but it is definitely a little bit darker than The Drowning Empire was. And I can't wait to see what happens in the next book. That wraps up my July reading wrap up. If you've made it this far, leave the green leaf emoji in honor of the restoration. Let me know what you're planning to read in August. And if you haven't seen, Draconithon is next month. Actually, when you're seeing this, it should be Draconithon right now. What are you doing? Go read more dragon books. Get out of here. Go. See you the next one. Bye.